Hi, Simeon.
Hey, stranger.
Nice to see you.
Likewise.
You started young in psychedelics. So define psychonaut and why would you be a psychonaut?
Yeah, I think the term psychonaut refers to like astronaut or anything where you end in not. And psycho usually referred to as psychedelics in plant medicines. And yeah, just from a very early age, I was fascinated and intrigued and curious about states of consciousness. So my journey began, like many psychonauts, early in my teen years,
Mm.
and with some, really excellent guides and teachers. And it's been a lifelong pursuit of, understanding the different modalities and the different medicines and the different landscapes and how they present and manifest. And yeah, the day is young. We'll see what else comes up today.
Yeah. So, what would you want someone to know about psychedelics? Having experienced so many, it
Mhm.
sounds like I did a little simian research. It sounds like you had early experiences, even of iboga, like at 17. After all this experience, do you feel like you want people to know about psychedelics?
Um, well, as long as it doesn't infringe upon the psychedelics I have in my stash drawer. No, but in all seriousness, the profundity of psychedelics for healing or self exploration is evident and has been there since the beginning of our species,
Mhm.
for sure, in the use of those. So humanity has, always tried to alter their consciousness, sometimes just for fun,
Mhm.
sometimes for greater insight. I'm in no way proselytizing psychedelics, but
Mhm.
if one is curious, there's a ton of resources and a ton of qualified teachers where one could safely and securely have their, quote unquote journey.
So it sounds like you had a calling, and the question was, how does one reach these mystical states? And um, experiences with also Tibetan Buddhism, and saw both of these as great technologies. So again, like when it comes to psychedelics as a technology for expanding consciousness, um, what has your own experience been?
My own experience has been one of great enthusiasm,
Mm-hmm.
in one where it's still very new.
Mm-hmm.
One, there's a gazillion, uh, I guess if I say 2 gazillion or an infinity or even more infinity, I mean, there's no end to how molecules and alkaloids and tryptamines work with the human body. So there's infinite possibilities of exploration if one is from the psychonautical perspective trying to ascertain and decipher how consciousness works.
Mm-hmm.
That's also true of a huge amount of mystical traditions. I gravitated towards Tibetan Buddhism for a number of reasons. Probably the biggest was I just met some really qualified teachers when I was young, and that became very consciously a choice and a path, knowing that all spiritual technologies, and certainly those with a modicum of mysticism and different states of consciousness, exist across cultures and across countries and across
Mm-hmm.
millennia. So I just happen to really have access to Tibetan Buddhism, but it could have been equally as much in some of the, I think there was a brief stint in Hinduism and Kabbalah, Merkaba mysticism, and Pentecostal Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
So finding those commonalities where, the outcome or the goal is kind of the same. It's,
Yeah.
happiness, usually first and foremost. And then that shifts into compassion for other humans.
Hmm.
They all kind of profess the same thing, and they all have different ways to get to it or to realize you're already in it. And for me, it's been a lot of the Asian
Hmm.
technologies
Hmm.
for pretty much just access. I was
Yeah.
lucky enough to meet some qualified teachers, and I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to go down this path, but have
Hmm.
explored a lot of different paths.
And what would you say if you had a psychedelic companion that's kind of been maybe one or two of the ones that have really impacted your life? Not that they all haven't, but what would you say has impacted you the most, or a couple that have impacted you the most, and why?
Yeah, early on, and again, this was more access. It was, growing up in the Midwest, a few decades ago, it wasn't easily, like, I didn't know anybody who had, Sonoran desert toads in the neighborhood. So it's just like, but there were a lot of guys who had magic mushrooms. So, as I reflect and look back, my first allies were definitely mushrooms.
Hmm.
That was cannabis and mushrooms, right? You're a kid and you want to have fun, whether it's a concert or just whatever. And that's what I was really first introduced to from an access point. Then I got to study with psychotherapists, and that was primarily LSD. So yeah, those were the first kind of
Hmm.
allies, the first deep dives into how do these work? How does one use them? What are the different technologies that can be utilized to enhance them? And then, of course, after the experience, then what do I do?
Right.
So it's really been, kind of the OG
Hmm.
psychedelics early on. Then a few years into it, started to meet others and started to do a lot more psychopharmacology and
Hmm.
research. And that led me to, find molecules wherever one could. And that was all across the board, the ayahuascas and the tobaccos and the bogas and on the synthetic side, any of the 2C, the 2CB, 2CI, Dragonfly, the list goes on, and the, tens of thousands of permutations in there. But traditionally, it's always been a 5-HT2A agonist, something that just
Hmm.
tickles that part of your brain, and you have, feelings of joy or dread, but they're always intense. Lately, I've been spending a lot of time in Africa. So, all things around, you know, indigenous plant medicines from the Congo Basin or West Africa have been, the last few years of at least psychonautical
Hmm.
exploration.
So I know you just got back from the Congo, and you are in what is probably known now because of Dr. Gull Dolan's work, who I know is, you know her well. You're still in that critical period, right?
I definitely am, although one could argue I've been in a critical period for a few decades.
That's true.
So I don't
That's
think there's
true.
been a longitudinal study from the Dolan lab on, a 30-year critical window yet. Um, that sounds like a good grant,
It
actually.
really does. Maybe we could work on that. So take me to the Congo. I'd love to hear what
Yeah,
happened.
no, it was a really fun trip, which culminated in writing an accord between four different nations. A lot of government meetings, and this president and this prime minister, and as well as people on the ground, from the cultivators. And it was Angola, Republic of Congo, and Gabon. It was a
Hmm.
very quick week and a half.
Wow.
I was down at an ibogaine clinic in Mexico, visiting a few of them, and a colleague was there, and he'd mentioned a name, and I'm like, oh, I know that name. I've been trying to connect with that person for a while. And he's like, well, I'm going to talk to him in a few minutes. And anyway, the conversation happened, and I was like, all right, I'll see you in the Congo. And there was a direct flight to Istanbul in about 3 hours from Cancun, and figured out my next leg in the air. But yeah, it started in the Republic of Congo and Point Noir, then led to all over the region, with most time spent in the Kumquati Nature Reserve, which is
Mm.
arguably the most biodiverse place on the planet.
Wow.
No shade to the Amazon or anything else, but
Right.
a lot of undiscovered plants there, as well as plants that we thought were extinct, which we came
Mhm.
across. From
Wow.
there was some meetings in Gabon as well, kind of the same thing, and then Angola. But it all culminated in this kind of macro opportunity to bring a few countries together around the narrative of one, let's not colonize Africa yet again.
Mhm.
Uh, so there was a maturation in how to effectively and ethically empower, support, be a part of, this Central African movement, um, which led to, at least the first draft of an accord, which could be a
Mhm.
convention or a treaty. And,
Mhm.
again, it was a first draft, but that was not my goal when I said, hey, yeah, there's a cheap flight to Istanbul. I'll see you in a day or two, or however long
Wow.
it takes me to get there. But yeah, it was an extraordinary week and a half, and learned a ton, and did a lot of, what I guess called drug hunting, where we're like, hey, can we find this subspecies of this
Wow.
rare iboga, or this other plant that has great healing properties for my day job, which is for the most part, venture capital, where, the tone would very much change from, healing and patient outcomes to, asymmetric upside of an alternative asset. But we know so many drugs are
Yeah.
inspired by plants, and so many drugs still today require the plant. We haven't been
Right.
able to synthesize everything. I don't think that's going to change for a while, even though we're seeing remarkable leaps in AI and finding drug candidates, for
Mhm.
that part of the job. So it was, more of a curiosity, more of a, hey, I've really wanted to explore um, some of the neighboring countries all around the Congo Basin. And, a guy I was following for quite a while and knew of his work, and just a happenstance kind of, hey, oh, you're talking to that guy? And, he's
Wow.
ironically in an Ibogaine clinic when the call happened. But
So
yeah, it's
going
hard
back
to believe it
to,
was
I have
only
a couple
2 weeks.
questions about this. So going back to first being in Mexico, looking at ibogaine clinics,
Yes.
what was the goal there, and what did you discover?
There were two goals. One, to greet some friends who I'd sent
Hmm.
down there and kind of give them a hug on the way
Oh,
out.
yeah.
Two, I was supporting some of those clinics, and even humbled to be the first investor early on, where,
Hmm.
it's a big leap for an entrepreneur, for anybody, any business owner, right? It's like, I'm going to do
Right.
this. So yeah, it's now going on third or fourth year since that first check was written, and that first ovation of, let's do this. This is needed. And,
Right.
it's going to be bumpy. Every entrepreneurial journey is, and there's going to be a lot of policy and regulatory and, media and optics and narratives, but, this can be successful, and, it could help a lot of people, which, at least at the clinics I visited, they were pretty much at max capacity, treating everything from substance use disorder to PTSD to traumatic brain injury. I mean, the list is infinite.
Wow. And what
Um,
are you finding as a fund manager, as far as looking also at psychedelics as not only impact for humanity and all of the things that you just said, what about as a business, from a business perspective? How are those clinics doing?
they're doing exceptional.
Mhm.
And there's, a waiting list across the board globally.
Wow.
because, of all the other things that happen from news stories and,
Mhm.
legislation. From the venture perspective, those are very strong signals. There's a need, there's an opportunity, everybody can win. That being said, the trend in the great majority of companies being, well capitalized is to create a pharmaceutical that's a single molecule and has
Mhm.
IP and
Mhm.
all of that. And I don't think it'll be one or the other. I think it's going to be both. But it's very rare, I find, where we come across a brand new innovation or invention of something molecular that
Mm.
was not first figured out by Mother Nature. But it is starting to happen for sure.
That's pretty wild. So then the Congo and your exploration into this biodiverse region, looking for maybe new strands of iboga or different medicines. Did you find
Mhm.
anything?
Yeah, quite a bit. We collected 18 species. We're still identifying in the lab. And that was my, childhood psychonautical kind
Dream.
of dream desire. But, there were also discussions about job development and capacity, and
Mhm.
that had nothing to do with plant medicine, and the fact that one out of four people will live on the continent of Africa, which is, for those who've never been, it's 54 different countries, maybe 55, helping a secession movement in West Africa kind of get their own country. And new countries pop up from time to time. It's always fun writing a constitution or realizing that there's a national identity. And I mean, here I sit in former Manhattan, without
Right.
getting into neo-colonialism, but this was
Mhm.
not a country a few
Mhm.
years ago, and now it's a country, and who knows if it'll be a country, the next 4 years. But this is not a political discussion. Um, so
How
yeah, it was a lot
wild
of
though
that.
to see those countries emerge and to write or be part of writing constitution.
Yeah, countries for me aren't dissimilar from companies. It's
Mhm.
that same ethos, it's that same stress, it's that same, just got to get it done. And technically, you only need four things: you need citizens, land, a constitution, and then the most important thing is you need your own beer. Because there's not really a country that
Yeah,
doesn't have their own
and
beer.
access to psychedelics and resources.
True, 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 true. But the first three for sure.
Mhm.
The beer is just an anomaly that I just don't know of a new country that doesn't have their own beer.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So now, when you were in Africa this time,
Yeah.
you took part in some iboga ceremonies, yes?
No, this was
No.
all business.
Oh,
This week
okay.
and a half. It was three different countries. Really short connection times. The 3 a.m. departures. The rerouting from you know, Republic of Congo because the Angola airport decided to close down for no reason to then get, rerouted to another country. So there was not a lot of time to do a full on initiation, but there was the opportunity to
Mhm.
sample, and
Mhm.
you could sample a lot of this plant species and get the general feel, and you begin to taste different alkaloids, and you go like, oh, this must have been grown here, and this is close to this subspecies. So there's definitely some imbibing, but not the full on rite of passage, 10 days minimum, deep in the jungle, eating the sacred wood and learning new songs and new dances and other ways to really pierce, what consensus reality is for most people.
Yeah. How many times have you done that? I know you're initiated within Bwiti, maybe?
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
a Buitia Bungee. I did an initiation in February. I've done a lot of like flood dosing of
Mm.
ibogaine. And then, majorly, and this goes back to, my high school years where I moved to to Ghana on my own when I was 17 and was introduced to it in a very different context, which was just kind of as a, a microdose on the dance floor. So there
Wow.
was nothing spiritual. There was nothing ancestral. There was
What
nothing.
was that like?
It was great. It was, depending on how you dose it and the structure of the different alkaloids, depending on what base iboga you're using, it was very much a stimulant and packaging, as well as an aphrodisiac. So,
Hmm.
my first iboga experience kind of happened on a dance floor at a dance club on the Togolese border to the song, which was at the top of the charts at that time in history. It was Right Said Freds, I'm Too Sexy for My Body, but it was also like an EDM mix up. So I just, kind of remembered that and
Mm.
dancing until the sun came up, and then, finding my way with some new female friends to spend the day together. And it was how majorly, like when you're in villages, it's not always a rite of passage. It's just a little country root bark, and
Mm-hmm.
going back to pre, becoming, scheduled. It was a great stimulant. There's a product sold in France, Lamparine, named after a town in Gabon, that became the favorite for sports
Oh, wow.
and especially high altitude athletes, so alpiners and mountaineers. And people have used it over many, many, many decades, even commercially. So
Mm.
it's really, the narrative is certainly the rite of passage and meeting your ancestors and substance use disorder, but the complexity of all the different alkaloids and all the other things we still don't know, but we're learning about
Mhm.
with science, brings you to a place of, holy cow, this has a lot of different applications, and you could dose it in a lot of different ways depending on what you're trying to get to or get at.
Mm. So you just mentioned science, and I know you are really interested in research, and you have some major scientists in the field on your board of different companies. What
Mhm.
excites you right now in the science piece? Like, what is the latest cutting edge science that we know right now on psychedelics?
I would say, some of the deals that are crossing our proverbial desk include things that elicit a psychedelic response, but are completely removed from anything molecularly.
Mm.
And this ties back into, mystical traditions where,
Mhm.
there's some great ones out there that didn't depend or use plant medicines. And that has everything to do with breath and
Mm.
energy and all those other things. But we're looking at a lot of brain to computer interface stuff, to non invasive neuromodulation. And
Mhm.
it's hard for me to not look at the data and go like, holy cow, this person
Mhm.
had PTSD and now they've just wore this helmet. And after 4 sessions with no therapy, their PTSD is gone and with no medicine. So the acceleration of technology that's happening leads me to believe that the exciting areas for
Mm.
psychedelics, even without an actual psychedelic, but
Yeah.
that same experience
Right.
perturbing the same receptors in the brain, will be a big shift in how we treat people and a big shift in how psychonauts explore. It's not there yet, but
Right.
it's you can feel it and see it, and it's like right around the corner.
Yeah, interesting. I interviewed recently a friend of ours, Nick from Wake,
Hmm.
and I was asking him what excites him the most, and he was talking about the studies of sound, the impact on sound on the brain, and the work that they're doing at Wake. It sounded fascinating, and we know, I
Yeah,
mean, we know that it's all frequency and energy,
yeah,
um, but scientifically to see the impact. So this helmet that you're talking about, what's actually happening? Are like pulses going into a
yeah.
certain receptor?
Pretty much, pretty much. I mean, there is. hundreds out there right now. There's becoming a very competitive landscape, but the general gist is you're, modulating or perturbing parts of the brain. Those parts might be the very same parts that a psychedelic would do,
Right.
after you ingest it. And the results are pretty, at first glance, pretty compelling.
Wow. Pretty interesting for, you think of the people that psychedelics aren't right for.
Yeah. And just, there's a reality of, at least, speaking from the US on this podcast,
Right.
there's a reality of a healthcare system with insurance companies and laws and policy. So if the end goal is, patient care, desirable outcomes, one should not necessarily be prejudiced towards a plant if a tech provides the same results. Now, of course, the jury is out on all
Right.
of this. And as I look at some of our investments, where we've had, the great fortune of investing in some of the top companies in the space, many of which would, and not even use the word psychedelic, would use, psychoplastogen, which now is gravitating or matured to neuroplastogen. There is this understanding that if it's really about the outcome, let's give it a try. But I don't know. I mean, I have great hope they'll all succeed and get through, the research and the clinical trials. But there's some great argument that, guys, it's kind of this thing that's been around since the beginning of time. It kind of works out of the gate right now. Why are we? But that's the complexity of our species, and always trying to complicate things. And at least the game that I'm playing right now, if we could use that metaphor.
Right. Yeah. So kind of going back to this original question, this original calling, psychedelics as a technology for you and your own kind of interest in mysticism. Is that to you kind of as an individual in the space? Besides, in the Western model, we're talking about mental health and healing the ailments of kind of Western culture. For you, what still drives you in this space?
That's really it. I mean, it's been a narrative thread since I could remember. I mean, it started with self-exploration. And it was like, oh, okay, I'm getting it. It's like, oh, maybe I can share this, and even make it a lifelong journey, which it's become. I think I'm equally as, capable and competent in talking about things that are just the outcomes and just the medicine and just the results. But it's a great disservice to not take in the whole human.
Right.
And that there's other ways, regardless of what medicine you're on, to be at peace and to be free of sickness and to increase health and wellness. Whether those all come from portfolio companies we invest in remains to be determined. Whether there's a shift in society and everything that's happening because we're so connected right now, like you can't. I mean, everybody's in their phone. Everybody's connected now. It's like we're really one. I mean, coming out of COVID, we felt that. It was like the first time where it was like in your face, we're all connected.
Right.
So with that connection there's this opportunity to uplift and to have greater clarity and what, the design of at least the current trajectory of our species is. Which again is very biased. I'm biased towards we can all be happy and healthy. I don't know if that's the best mission, but it's certainly fun trying it. And for me personally, there's still that path. Like every time I think I make a little progress, it's like, oh shit, I know even less. I'm even more wrong. Anyway, you know how it goes. It's
I just came back from a 9-day meditation retreat that felt like a boga on one of the days, and was just startled by a shadow that came up.
Yeah.
It's just like, really? What? How intense and deep and powerful, and how beautiful it was to see kind of the whole structure, like this wild projection, knowing all along it's a projection, yet the intensity of it, and then watching kind of the thought pattern that came out of it. I mean, it's such powerful work to use these tools as a window into the parts of ourselves that need to dissolve, the parts of ourselves that you said, I know less and less. I mean, to come to that place of not knowing, again and again, and to come even more so, I think for me, what I'm noticing is even the subtle way my mind comes on and imagines Michaela, imagines the separate self, the separate. I mean, the fact that that alone is so embedded in our culture,
Yeah.
duality. I think one of the pieces that's so fascinating for me that psychedelics have again and again illuminate is the oneness that you were just talking about, that we learned in COVID, right? That we are all interconnected. But even that, the first kind of move out of that oneness to a selfing mechanism, a thought of self,
Yeah.
is where it seems that all suffering occurs.
No doubt.
Because that's
No
the one that
doubt. Yeah.
desires, and it has aversions and desire versus being just that pure beingness.
It's tricky. I mean, the human condition. I mean, this is another great reason that psychedelics, whether it's through a brain trip, and that becomes the new terminology, or through an ancient plant medicine, is because, humanity, which is a great gift to be, a human at any time in the history of our species, which is a brand new. I mean, we're so new.
Babies.
Right? It's that is the human condition. And what's great about psychedelics is it immediately goes to the heart of the human condition, which is our habits and our behaviors and how we see ourselves, and everything that happens, by the age of 3 or 4, when you're conditioned by parents, by friends, by whoever's in kindergarten with you, to self-identify as having a character and having an individuation about yourself. And it's really hard to shake that. Psychedelic experiences, like you had mentioned, you have that glimpse and that beingness and that oneness, but that's a very short window. Even if there's a long critical window before you slip back into habitual patterns, before you shift back into me, and who am I, and am I recognized, and
do they see me?
Exactly.
Like all the little wounds come back on.
All of them. And
am I doing enough? Am I being enough? Like,
exactly. And that's a predominantly a Western thing, but as the world conflates with a Starbucks on every corner and a cell phone in every hand, and even with the technologies that are going to become even more embedded, even in the next couple of years,
it's moving so quickly.
Chips to everything,
quantum computing. It's crazy.
So fast, and how will that impact the human condition, for good or for bad? The jury's out.
Right. Even some people are, it's so interesting, we're all humans, and yet we have such vast differences of opinions, even when it comes to like cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
It's total freedom from a financial system. Others would say it's, not. It's, there's so many different, we're at such maybe every species, humans, as you said, we're so young, has thought this for every generation has thought it. But I look right now and I'm like, this is the most fascinating time to be alive. We have supposedly suddenly the admission of other species potentially even
Mhm.
here on the planet. We have some
Mhm.
weird kind of thing going on in New Jersey right now with
Right.
drones that no one can just say what they are, but we're safe. And we have the psychedelics where we all thought that, I don't know, I thought anyway, that, the FDA was going to make a different decision, and that changed things. It's fascinating. As you were just saying, it feels to me almost like timelines converging. Think of all the different timelines on our planet right now, that it's almost like the human mind can't even grasp it.
Yeah, there's definitely schools of thought, and this gets into, existential risk, but
Mhm.
I'm certainly convinced that at least in this lifetime, even if I get to, the rep peptides and get to true longevity and immortality, um, that these are the most interesting times
Yeah.
for this species. When I reflect on early times with like Ray Kurzweil or
Mhm.
anybody who was in this, singularity movement or the Don't Die movement, which is picking up a lot of new acolytes and followers. We are at an inflection point where the technology and the acceleration of even an idea could shift everything
Everything.
as we knew it. Like in a day, this
Yeah.
could happen. Like by maybe even within this podcast, there could
Right.
be the extinction of or the maturation into a superhuman. And yet, even with all of that, it is still rooted in dualism
Right.
and not really just being present. And when you're
Mhm.
present, it all just falls away
All of it.
and you don't need to label it. And you're just there. And that's the hardest and easiest place to be at all at the same time.
Right? Now, I'm sure in your, travels and similar to me, I think like I had that calling really young, studying a lot of different faith traditions from Buddhism to Hinduism to just that
Yeah.
deep question of what is this mystical experiences before psychedelics. Psychedelics became like a curiosity of, oh, can that like blast me open even more?
Yeah.
Um, which, you know the answer to that. and but I'm sure in your passage and your seeking, you've come across people that are always there,
Yeah.
where the selfing mechanism falls away for good. Um,
I definitely have. And this is where, there's this great contention between who I perceive myself to be, which
mhm,
society I'm living in. It
mhm,
feels completely counterintuitive to say if like I was to email you or text a bunch of friends, it's like, guys, I'm done. I'm happy. I'm in a place of pure consciousness. That's why I'm not showing up to work. That's why I'm not paying the bills. That's why I'm not trying to get a promotion. It's just completely counterintuitive to the structure in the game
mhm,
we've been led to believe is the only and albeit most important reality of a a nascent civil society.
right. So if someone said to you, okay, Simeon, I am totally new to this whole field of psychedelics, and I really want to be kind of blasted open.
Mm.
What psychedelic would you say? Because I ask, it's been interesting to do this podcast to ask like people what psychedelic has influenced or changed their life the most.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say, first go on a 10-day silent retreat.
Yep.
Don't rush to it immediately.
Mhm.
Oftentimes people find it out of desperation. It's not always the
Mhm.
psychonaut just looking for out of curiosity, of which I would put more emphasis on, this medicine or that medicine. This is where I put on my more like a clinical hat. I'm like, well, what's your
Mhm.
indication? Here's the research, and here's the underground, and pre that, here's all the indigenous indications of
Mhm.
what medicine to use for what malady. often always in a different cultural context. Like it might not be called schizophrenia, it might be called demon possession, right?
Right.
But
Right.
it's the same underlying spiritual or psychospiritual or neurochemical a response to a condition. It differs. It differs from person to person.
Yeah.
If someone's saying, "Hey, I want to, blast off," I would say, "All right, well, how much time do you have?"
Hmm.
But I'm always very hesitant.
Yeah. Cautious.
People come into it and they don't really know how strong and powerful it is, and that it could change their whole life. And I've certainly been witness to people that had a not a challenging trip, a bad trip. And I know we're
Mm.
not supposed to say a bad trip, we're supposed to,
Right.
but they never came back. They were never
Really.
the same. It was damaging. It was damaging to the psyche. It was damaging to who they thought they were. So yeah, it's not for everybody, and it shouldn't be given liberally to anybody. On the other hand, you have cultural movements, and you have this, wonderful curiosity of humanity that just
Hmm.
wants to try something new and experience something new. I was riding my bike today in the city. I saw a young kid, and he was spinning around. Do you remember when you were a kid, you just spin in circles until you couldn't, because it was like, oh my God, it's just fun.
So
I'm dizzy
fun.
and Earth is
Right.
spinning. So, like, that component should always be honored, exploration and fun, but, add a little psychedelic to it. And without the right supervision,
Right.
you could, yeah, you could have damage that is really hard to correct.
Mm.
Rare,
Mm.
but I've seen it.
You have.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think everybody has that one friend
Mm.
in high school or college who did just too much acid, or
Mm.
just were never quite the same,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you straddle these two worlds, kind of this Western global North, and then your time in West and East Africa. It must at times be like entering two different, as we were just talking about, timelines, two different worlds. What's that like? That alone has to be a psychedelic experience. Like what that reveals to the soul, what it reveals to yourself when you're getting on a plane, you're going there, you're in the jungle looking, you're in
Yeah.
nature, and then you come back and you're in a city busy street in New York City. What's that
Yeah.
like?
Yeah, unfortunately, my response is going to be the opposite. It's all the same.
It's all the same.
And whether it's an urban jungle
Right.
of a metropolis or elsewhere, and that's because humans are the same.
Right.
They all kind of want the same thing. That's just where we're at as a species. So early on, I learned a lot of words and a lot of languages, because I knew if I had these 4 words, I can pretty much get by anywhere. And that was, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm thirsty, and I'm horny. And if you know those 4 words,
Basic needs.
that's it. And whether you're in a village or a boardroom,
Mhm.
it's everybody still, I mean, going back to maybe 10, 15 minutes ago, like me, and am I being recognized, and ambition and this, and I can't just let it all
Right.
go away and sit in bliss. So you see that similarity. You see people cry the same and laugh
Mhm.
the same. So yeah, one day it might be 120 degrees deep in some, Cameroonian jungle with no
Right.
running water and electricity. But that's no different from the responses and desires when you're, on Wall Street in a
Right.
three-piece suit. It's the
Right.
same humanity. So for me, it started to, and I don't want to sound jaded, because it would be like, dude, you got to go there. And like, oh my God. And you were on it.
Right.
But it's like, yeah, it was kind of like, I was on my phone and I was chatting with this person. And I mean, even when we
Right.
got rerouted to, this was just a few days ago, but we got rerouted to, we're supposed to go to Landau in Angola, but the plane got rerouted to Republic of Congo. And the captain was confused. Like, I don't know what's going on. The airport's closed. We got rerouted here. Everyone was trying to get to Istanbul to get connections to wherever. And out of the window, there were all the, airplane or airline employees, service guys and whatnot. And instead of like refueling or whatever they were supposed to do, that were kind of grounded on this abandoned airport with vestiges of like weird neo-colonial tanks from centuries ago. All the workers were doing like TikToks. They were shooting like TikToks. I was like, what is going on? And that's not slowing down. So again, it's becoming a lot more easy because it's all, to me at least, becoming homogenized to some great extent. I first had that experience. I was in about 18,000 feet in the Himalaya and turn of the century doing a humanitarian project in Tibetan monastery. And, I was just sure I was off the radar, but I had one of those satellite phones and my phone rang and it was the HR department from the company and talking about my severance. I'm like, what? Like, come on. Can I never find the fact that we were in another jungle a few days ago and the chimpanzees, fortunately, somehow broke out of one place and then I attacked the Starlink, so we were offline, but that was like just a few hours, and then somebody came with another Starlink. So that's becoming more and more and more as languages disintegrate. Every day we lose X amount of languages and cultures merge, and consumerism is rampant. And so, unfortunately, it's not as exotic and differentiated for me anymore.
Right.
But I don't know if it ever was, because a human's a human. They want to be loved and they want to grieve and they want to be acknowledged and recognized. And I haven't seen a difference there from the most, obscure lost tribe deep in some jungle to, the valedictorian on a path to whatever in Western society.
Right. So I know that just your life, you had two parents in the Peace Corps, and you have been really interested in impact and building companies, but also just being in Africa and being part of creating impact. If you had to say, like, what would be the most important impact that you would like to create in the world? You're like, if I did that, that would, what's important to you right now?
Yeah, well, I think I've achieved it. It was eventually being invited on to the Psychedelic Mom podcast. I'm done. No, but in all seriousness,
you're done.
It's
or is it just playing and exploring life and all these things?
Is part of it, but that's really easy to do, right? You can just play and explore and not have purpose. But yeah, there's something. There's a lot of there's a lot of data and research behind it. I really started to get it. This was a previous chapter, but working with kids and after school programs and underserved, and encouraging service or social emotional learning through gamification and just watching the impact of, an 8th grader in Chile actually getting to the 9th grade was really kind of cool. And there's definitely a dopamine hit. It's a little paradoxical because I'm self-servingly altruistic. It's like that altruism somehow feeds me. But how can that be? I'm doing it for myself, but I'm helping others. But there's, dopamine hits and a bunch of other things like that. I also really like, puzzles. Impact always is like a puzzle, whether it's writing an accord between African nations around trade and tourism, biodiversity, whether it's, the medical system and all the nuances and varieties of getting things wrong. So just recently somebody said, "Oh, you're a puzzle guy. Like, what are you talking about?" It's like, because we were doing a deal together, and they're like, "Oh, that was really cool how you brought that in and that in." And it's like, "Oh, you see everything like a puzzle." And for some reason, impact and global issues that are incredibly convoluted and or complex is like just a fun puzzle. So again, it's impact, but it's self-serving because I like to do puzzles. And the harder the puzzle is, the more exciting it is to see it come into focus.
Did you ever read the book? It's called Awareness. I think it's by Anthony DeMello. I read it in my 20s. And I remember having this wild aha moment and kind of angry in the book when it said, like, everything that you do, everything is self-serving. Name one thing that you don't do. And it was like, when you do good, it's because you make you feel good. When you love somebody, it's because this, and that. It was so radical at 20
Yeah.
to be like, wait, no, I'm just a good person.
Yeah.
And then to have the realization, like, we're hardwired, obviously, too. You said you got a dopamine hit. When we see somebody do something good, we actually experience good ourselves. We don't even have
Yeah.
to do it. But it is interesting to think, like, yeah, I guess we're back to the complexity of a human being and what makes us human and what makes us, what motivates us and what we're really seeking. And as you said, like, ultimately, no matter where we go on the planet, it's those same things.
Yeah. Pretty
You know,
much. Pretty much.
it's so nice to have you here today.
Likewise.
Any last thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to play a little game, a little puzzle today. And, based on this conversation, I'm going to try to sit in non duality as much as possible, especially because as I look at my calendar, everything on my day is going to be a triggering me, you. So I'll let you know how that goes. And if I burst into a rainbow at the end of the day, you'll know because I'll visit you in the dream state or something.
Yeah, exactly. I'll know.